Public Artist in Residence. Recording in progress, everybody. Got it? Okay. And we have the first speaker is going to be one of those public artists in residence. But I wanted to just say that there are a lot of different ways to do this. And actually, quite honestly, even the artists on this panel might not agree with each other on how to communicate as artists. But I think that we'll see examples, like really top shelf examples of how artists can communicate and maybe break through some of those barriers that have been so endemic to the way that we're not communicating with each other in the city and in the country right now. So I'm going to be really quick right now. And again, all the artists and panelists, we're going to try to give a quick example so we can move on to the next and get to a conversation amongst ourselves. And then y'all who are not on the panel, start thinking of your questions now. We really want to hear from you and get the questions, because the most important thing is that you come away with this understanding, whether you agree or disagree with the idea that artists are going to be able to help unlock some doors that have been locked. We want you to feel heard and feel that you had the moment to ask your question. So last thing I did before I left the city, I'm up in Massachusetts, was to visit Yazmany at the incredible People's Bus. So Yazmany, you're up first. And you can see Yazmany's bio in the chat. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Tom. Good morning, everybody. It is a pleasure and a privilege to be here with you all. I will share my screen. I'm a visual storyteller. I was selected as the first artist in residence for the City of New York Civic Engagement Commission in the summer of 2020. When I arrived at the agency in August, people were, on the streets advocating for change of all kinds. And my immediate awareness or sensitivity was to show up, and as an artist, how can I write a love letter to my neighbors? How can I engage meaningfully in a metaphor that involves deep care, which is where the Public Artists in Residence program begins with Merle, who in 1977 really believed that it was showing up and shaking the hands of sanitation workers and engaging with folks who were taking care of the city in new ways to really transform the way we think about those people in our city. And so, just for all of you who might not know, the Civic Engagement Commission was created in 2018 in a citywide referendum. It is the only city agency with a direct mandate to build trust in our democracy. And when I showed up, I realized that most people have no idea this agency exists because it's new. And so my job really was to embed myself within the agency to really understand its streams of work, participatory. They're meant to be doing a citywide participatory budgeting process. They're meant to be supporting community boards, and they're meant to be creating language access. We need to have translators at all of our polling sites so that when people are voting, they have access. And so immediately I was like, okay, well, how do we center the values of this agency to tell the story of the agency? And because my first 4 months at the agency were just on Zoom, at one point I had everyone show up in sweats, and I had them imagine that they were jogging in the park and that we were gonna meet my mother, who's been in this country for 30 years, but who doesn't speak English, who says she doesn't speak English. And then my nephew, who's 6 years old, who speaks English, Spanish, a little bit of Mandarin, and a little bit of sign language. And I said, how would you tell the story of who we are to these people? Because in my mind, these are the people we're meant to be serving. And immediately, the chief of staff, Leslie Brown, talked about democracy being a table where the young show up with their dreams and the elders show up with their wisdom to have a conversation. And that made me immediately conscious that the work was to move democracy from the brain, from the head to the heart. So how do we center people in everything that we do as a Civic Engagement Commission, beginning with the fact that the word civic engagement, when you translate them into the official 11 languages of New York City, you begin to get lost, even with the name of the agency. So how do we simplify our language and really communicate through our colors, through our photography? I knew that we had to meet people where they are in this moment. How do we meet folks after 2 years of challenges, of difficulties, of so much that's been so disorienting? How can we meet folks where they are? And so I said, let's get a bus and let's make it the people's bus and let's transform a vehicle. At first, that vehicle was a yellow school bus because I wanted to point to the fact that we have the most segregated school system in the country. When I then learned from DCAS, the procurement department of the city of New York, that those vehicles are actually privately contracted, they shared a slew of vehicles that were possible. And from those vehicles, there was a corrections bus. And I understood in that moment when I saw that possibility that that transforming a corrections bus could be the most powerful poem we could write in this moment as a city agency, transforming government, transforming the way we think about what government is How do we really honestly show up and experiment in public? How do we prototype in public? How do we test the idea of a mobile unit that should go and bring resources wherever it goes? But one thing that's really important to me is that the idea that quality communicates dignity. What does that mean? It means that when we show up, not only are we bringing resources, but how are we making sure that we're prioritizing beauty and joy when we do that? And so literally I began sketching out and illustrating different types of possibilities. But as the bus left Rikers on June 4th, and a week later, we did a ranked choice vote tour that we called the We Decide Our Future tour, where we went all over the 5 boroughs asking New Yorkers what they wanted the bus to become. And one of the miracles of this work is that literally we had Mujeres en Movimiento participating with us, and they were teaching folks how to rank choice vote using the people's bus. Should it be a stage? Should it be a wellness center, an art studio, a pantry that gives food? And literally people were practicing the ballot, how ranked choice voting works. And that what was beautiful was some of the Mujeres en Movimiento don't have papers, and they were teaching folks how to vote even though they cannot vote for themselves, which I think is a really powerful aspect of the miracle of this work. We had postcards that people all over the 5 boroughs drew, and we asked people, what should the bus look like? From these postcards, we literally took all of these images and amalgamated them into a mural, which is the beaded mural you'll see in a minute. But from all of the ideas and from the voting, people said the People's Bus should be a stage where we tell stories, collect stories of resilience, and share stories of resilience. All of my drawings are, I think of them as, yes, a pencil meeting a piece of paper, but it's really an invitation to imagine our collective future. So all of these pencil drawings are the notion of like, gosh, why can't there be a show of in the heights, right? How do we make our art accessible and really available to all of our communities so that it can be enriched? Mujeres en Movimiento seem here working in what I now call the People Studio on a mural that's made up of 8.8 million beads. The Mujeres like to talk about the beads being one for every New Yorker. That's why it's 8.8 million. One thing that's really beautiful was it was really important for us as we were doing this work to partner with young people. The CEC, the Civic Engagement Commission, now has a People's Fellowship, which is young people between the ages of 14 and 21 who are now part of our leadership program. And it was important for us to have young people making decisions about what this bus should become and how we should think about it and where it should go. And literally the young people decided that all of the graffiti that was inside of the bus, done in pencil and with handcuffs, should be reflected in the mural in gold beading. So
yes, Monty, we have, yeah. Sorry. Just in order to keep on time, we're already over time.
All right,
yeah. Keep going,
20 more seconds. So this is the bus. Yes. These are our young people, and this is the actual interior of the bus as it is right now. And we had a beautiful event this past weekend, what Tom was talking about, where we lit the inside of the bus for the first time. And that, yeah, that's a little bit of this work.
Okay, and by the way, just even though we're over, the basic idea here is to create this incredible mechanism of communication that draws people, and I saw how it worked the other day, and get people to understand, and this was directly related to ranked choice voting.
I quickly wanted to show a little video of everybody next to the bus at one of the events.
Okay, cool. Okay, great. That is fantastic. And that is the first speaker. I'm sorry, it's just we're trying to keep on time. Okay, the second one actually, so first of all, Yazmany was quickly saying the name Mujeres en Movimiento. That's a group of women from Corona, Queens, we know them quite well, who worked on another project, which was a long-term in situ project called Immigrant Movement. Now, I'm gonna move over to Dia, who's up next. Dia is, again, one of the architects of that program and ran it. Now she's a curator over at, associate curator over at Creative Time. Dia, take it away. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Hi, everyone. Thank you for that, sharing your beautiful work, Yazmany. I'm going to share very briefly. I know we are on time crunch. So as Tom said, I'm currently a curator at Creative Time, but I'm going to talk a little bit about 2 projects that I had the privilege of working on that are a little bit older. And basically just to share with you all that I think the most effective efforts towards catalyzing civic participation is an investment in long-term political education and empowerment of those particularly systematically disenfranchised from political participation and those normally often overlapping very distrustful of our institutions, often rightfully so. And so this, I'm going to talk briefly about Immigrant Movement International, an artist project initiated by Tanya Bruguera in 2011 with the Queens Museum and Creative Time. And this was really initiated to be at first with the dreams of being a political party for undocumented and new immigrants. When that proved not possible, it turned into a kind of think tank, community center, political organizing space in Corona, Queens, the most immigrant dense neighborhood in New York City for new immigrant communities. And a lot of activity happened there from being a site of protest, of organizing political slogan writing, of pro bono legal services, of the Corona Youth Orchestra meeting. It's a really multi-generational space of community building that unfolded over 7 years. And in those 7 years, a lot of artist collectives were formed, including kind of what we're learning. It's like the OG of the Public Artists in Residence program, the Mujeres en Movimiento, who are a group of mothers that came together through fitness classes and Zumba classes at Immigrant Movement International, and this kind of shared need and desire to move together. And over these years of participating in all of the various programming at Immigrant Movement and even leading them, they started to identify themselves as an activist group and an artist collective on their own, and did a lot of organizing work in Corona, including a very contentious battle to get bicycle lanes put in on Roosevelt Avenue. And this group, as well as all participants in Immigrant Movement, are like of varying immigration statuses. So this kind of political participation, the stakes are quite high for a lot of folks involved. So when we launched the Public Artist in Residence program with the Department of Cultural Affairs in 2014, it was with Merle Euclides, who's behind me, in our hearts, and her kind of care work with the Department of Sanitation for 40 years. And I was also really thinking about how artists could be at the table to help design solutions to the city's most pressing problems, and to really create pathways for two-way dialogue between community and politicians and elected officials and those with decision-making powers in these policy offices. And the first one we launched was at the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs. And it was a no-brainer to bring in Tanya Bruguera, who had been doing this work in Corona, who brought in the Mujeres en Movimiento along with her. And this was right around the time when IDNYC launched. And the project that they were working on was really to kind of help engender trust within immigrant communities, enough so to get the IDNYC, which would unlock public services and access to public facilities for undocumented folks. Obviously, it's not an easy task, nor is it probably an authentic task to ask undocumented folks to trust the government. So the Mujeres and Tanya really quickly realized that this would have to be a two-way dialogue, a situation in which this group could really create pathways for undocumented folks to hold the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs accountable to their work. So they formed this bicycle messenger group called Cycle News. And for over a year, we're out every weekend delivering information on IDNYC, on credited and trusted and free legal services to undocumented folks, as well as like a handful of other services that the city was offering. And in turn, we're bringing back really important information and demands from undocumented folks, which led the agency to organize really specific town halls in which they were bringing other city agencies to talk with these folks about what is already available and how they could really improve their services to meet the needs of undocumented folks. So I'll stop there, but I did have the pleasure of launching and co-directing the Public Artist in Residence program. And this is just one example of so many. And now it's in its, I think, 7th or 8th year, which is really exciting. So happy to talk more about that when we get to Q&A.
Beautiful, thanks, Dia. And I think, I was watching this all happen from, whatever, I wasn't day to day like Dia was, but there were some great meetings in City Hall in Spanish where folks said, okay, you have to listen to us. And there's some really interesting observations, which we can go into. Eric, you're up next. Now, I just want to say that, again, there are different, very, very different kinds of approaches. And I think what you're going to hear from Eric is that there are approaches that meet people where they are, that for 7 years, like immigrant movement. There are projects that move around town, that do one thing over a period of time, like what Yazmany has been up to, sitting there around issues like voting. And then there are also, and I don't know exactly what you're talking about, Eric, but I'm guessing, projects that hit the media big time and hit lots of people in a different way. So Eric, you're up next.
Thanks, Tom. It's so nice to be here with so many friends. So my name's Eric Gottesman. I'm an artist, and for a couple of decades worked on projects like Tom just described, which are sort of very community-based, very specific within different neighborhoods even, or communities in different parts of the world. The project that I'm going to talk a little bit about today and show a video that Laura asked me to show is called For Freedoms, which is a project that I co-founded with Hank Willis Thomas and others in 2015, actually, right before the 2016 election. We sort of pretended that we were, as artists, we were, it kind of started as a performance in a way. We started as a super PAC, an artist-led super PAC. So we were kind of masquerading as political operatives, asking the question of what role does art play in creating our politics, which I think we'll talk a lot about. Over the last 5 years, we've done campaigns all over the country. We've harnessed the power of media. We've sort of helped launch small and large communities of artists, including the Wide Awakes, of which Amy is a part, and along with others. So we've done sort of direct civic engagement work, but we've also been really focused on what I would say is rebranding patriotism and thinking about the deep roots under which the systems that surround us have been corrupted in certain ways, and thinking about how culture and art can help us dig deep into that. I'm going to talk a little bit about, I'm going to show the video, which is really about kind of, it gives a sense of what our national strategy has been and was in 2018 in the lead up to the midterm elections, even though we also did a lot last year around the 2020 elections in a campaign we called the 2020 Awakening, where we had kind of ground teams, even in the midst of the pandemic, going out and doing activities all over the country, culminating in Wide Awakes Day, which is now October 3rd, a national holiday. But in 2018, we ended up doing the 50 state initiative, which was activations of For Freedoms through all 50 states, through partners and billboards in all 50 states. So I'm going to just share that video here. Here we go. Oh boy. I just tried this and it's now giving me some technical issue.
I'm Hank Willis Thomas.
I'm Eric Gottesman.
We are part of a collective of people who are for freedoms.
There's no line between art and politics. All art is political, and all politics is the result of the culture in which we live.
We want to encourage curiosity in public life.
In 2018, we planned and executed the largest creative collaboration in American history called the 50 State Initiative.
We collaborated with over 250 institutions and 800 artists all across the country.
We did town hall meetings led by artists
We held exhibitions. We also installed billboards in all 50 states.
People are just willing to join in and participate, and that's a great responsibility, but it's also a great honor.
First, the culture often moves, and then it becomes something that shifts people in power to a certain direction. And so that's the kind of strategy that we're looking at. And the way that we're doing that is by building a network of institutions and artists that are also aligned with this idea of wanting to invest in culture as a lever to shift who has power and who doesn't.
Our goal is to outlive ourselves. Our entire Four Freedoms team is looking forward to the day that Four Freedoms is seen as an approach to society.
Art is dangerous, you know? It's dangerous to power. As a result, there's been a kind of infrastructure of how art is structured in society that we're trying to unfold and disassemble and reassemble into something else.
We really see this as an open source provocation. The best thing about, I think, Four Freedoms is when other people come to us and say, we just did this. And we're like, okay. I don't know if there's a person that we've interacted with in the past several years that we didn't try to enlist.
When people come with ideas, they're expecting that maybe somebody else has a better idea of how to do it. We're often trying to turn it back on other people and say, what's your idea? How can we make that happen?
Our strategy is pretty much blindly walking into the wind and hoping that if we fall, we can get back up.
Yep.
So that gives a sense.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, we'll get to more of that. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to Marco. So Marco, how are you doing over there? Okay, Marco was a colleague in city government, worked together quite a bit, and is now running a cultural organization that believes in arts and social justice and has in its own DNA from the beginning. Take it away, Marco.
Good morning, everybody. Tom, it's great to see you. So I'm Marco Carrion. I'm the relatively new executive director of El Puente. Before that, as Tom said, I spent about 7 years in city government as the Commissioner of Community Affairs, and then the majority of my career before that was as a labor organizer and political operative, essentially. But my entire career has really been based on mobilizing folks, organizing, and really communicating and empowering marginalized communities. A little bit about El Puente before I show some slides. We are a community-based, youth-centered human rights organization based in Williamsburg, Bushwick, and Puerto Rico. And we use arts and education to inspire and nurture leaders for peace and justice. We create community-led movements of self-determination amongst low-income, Latinx, and BIPOC communities through our holistic leadership and membership model. We were started 40 years ago by groups of organizers, local artists, and faith leaders. And in that, we have one of the most comprehensive Latino-led art collectives in Brooklyn. So we're guided by our organizational frameworks, and one of which is Arts for Social Change. And through that, we channel the power of arts towards personal and community transformation, or as we call it, passion, purpose, and power. So we employ this framework in pre-professional arts trainings, after school and summer arts programming for youth. We also have something called Cadre, which is our community artist development and resource exchange, which we nurture local artists of color. We help them expand their capacity to organize, access resources, and develop and present new works. So that is all to say, without the arts, there is no El Puente. And I'm going to share my screen and just show a couple of examples. So hopefully everyone can see my screen. So this is our work, if folks can see it. We believe in, as I said, mobilizing and using arts to engage folks. We use arts in these images to talk about one of our primary focuses, which is environmental justice, to really demystify the issues that are often made intentionally so complex so that communities cannot engage. We create spectacle We create open spaces. We believe in creating sacred circles. And this is because we believe that at the end, what people really want to do is to belong. And in the spaces we create senses and spaces for belonging. What you're seeing here is a youth that we mobilize at various events under our Nuestro Aire, our air banner. And it's really to talk about the lack of green spaces, equitable green spaces, the particulate matter in the air. This slide is our destruction of our coral reefs, and to make this in ways that our folks can understand. This is our rally that happened 2 weeks ago in Union Square Park, where we sent our bomba and ploneros out to perform, to do improvisational songs about Luma, the takeover of the Puerto Rican grid system. And this is all meant to make these things, which are sometimes people seem kind of overwhelming and maybe too large to handle, into spaces that they can enter. So that's it. Thank you.
Marco, you are a paragon. That's beautiful. And so just also to be clear, so El Puente, also you guys run a school?
We started a high school about 25 years ago, the Academy for Peace and Justice, which is a public school, which was one of the original community schools in New York City. And we also have a little bit community school and Beacon program in a middle school, MS-50.
Right. So so there's a lot of stuff going on at El Puente. A lot of it's very art centric, social justice centric, but no, that's unusual for a cultural arts organization also to run a public school in New York City. So yeah, it's really one of a kind. Okay, now our last speakers on the panel, Amy and Sean, amazing artists. They're going to have a little bit more time because there's two of them. But I'll just hand it over to you guys. And, some of the things are just circulating through my mind again about the kind of questions we want to ask ourselves. Is the question of, how do you capture people's imagination, like people who are, let's say, disenfranchised and feel outside of the system? There has to be a kind of a two-way dialogue, power sharing. It's not just about communicating to people, it's communicating with people. That's just been running through my mind, that's not something that is often done by government well. Now, that was Marco's job in our last administration, but he did a fantastic job with it, but it's very hard for government to think about doing things that way. Cultural organizations also are usually set up to tell people stuff, not to listen. Anyway, that's a little sidebar there. Sean and Amy, take it away.
It's the proper leader, Tom. Go for it, Amy.
Yes, thank you so much, Tom, for those questions. Thanks to all the panelists for being so inspiring and everyone else for being here. So I'm Amy Koshbin. I'm a fellow in civic engagement currently at Pratt Institute. I'm an artist, activist, and educator, and I work in social practice similar to Sean. I ran for city council, and now I'm encouraging youth to run for office, get involved in local campaigns, and vote, all through the creative lens of artistic practice. And so what we're going to present today is Political Intimacy, which is a project that, similar to what Marco was talking about demystification, it's demystifying and humanizing the process of running for local office, the political process as well, through this lens of socially engaged art practice. So it's ongoing. It's a civic art project that aims to empower and inspire youth to push for change in the electoral system that we know is problematic, broken, and disenfranchises certain communities. And so in collaboration with Sean and Allison at Recess Assembly, this program encourages civic deliberation, collaborative experiential research, media, and art making. And we're just going to kind of kick it off by showing a video from the last round of Political Intimacy, and then we'll kind of follow it up with a little bit more detail because the video says a lot. Okay, 1 second. I just want to make sure. Sharing sound. Okay. Ooh. Okay, great. Anytime you want to shoot, it's like, welcome to the car parade. I'm Amy Koshben. I am a professor at Pratt and a fellow in Civic Engagement. We're bringing together Pratt Institute, amazing students. We're bringing together peer leaders from the Recess Assembly program. Recess Assembly is an artist-led alternative to incarceration. It's a program offering long-term paid training and pathways to creative employment for court-involved youth.
I joined Recess about 6 months ago. They gave me an opportunity to learn how to print and showcase my art through a different type of light.
That one came out way better. Oops, that might be the one.
And we're collaborating
to get people that don't know more informed about political things.
Yeah. This project that we're doing is all about demystifying and humanizing running for office.
I think it would be really valuable for all of us to learn together who's running against these folks, what are their positions against their other candidates, why are they becoming city council candidates to begin with.
Today we were talking with Eric Botcher. He's running for city council.
Hi, I'm Eric.
Hi. I'm Tyra. Nice to meet you.
Michael Hollingsworth.
I'm running for City Council in District 35.
We're interviewing Crystal Hudson.
Running for City Council in the 35th District.
I'm running for New York City Council District 9.
It's our time, one love. I'm an artist and activist, and I'm also running for mayor of New York City.
I'm Jabari Brisport. I'm a state senator in the 25th State Senate District.
So you are the senator for the District of Pratt. We're in collaboration with Recess Art, which is also in the district. So these are constituents of yours as well.
I guess my criticism, which could be for any candidate in general, is just I feel like I would hope that there would be change, but I just don't feel like no matter who goes into office, like it's gonna stop me from being homeless again or stop me from being harassed by the police again.
Right.
I wonder what questions would you have for a candidate about how they're going to keep their promises?
How do we find ways to feel empowered to change the electoral system that we know is so broken?
So there are families that make less than $10,000 a year, and there are equal amount of families that make over $200,000 a year and more. So my question to you is, how can you possibly address and redistribute the wealth?
You are speaking my language now. The way you do reduce the wealth gap is through progressive taxation, taking more money from the people that can afford it and putting it into social programs and jobs for people who have less.
Like, I hope you do really think about getting into politics. I hope you do someday run, because that goes to what I was saying about what qualifies you, right? I'm gonna have a different lens on how we fund police because I have the experience of a false arrest. And people who haven't been that don't understand how incredibly dehumanizing it is. The interaction is trauma. You speaking to the gunshots and the 4th of July, you speaking to your experience of houselessness, like that, it's trauma. These are dehumanizing things that don't need to exist. They do not have to be here. The world does not have to be set up this way.
Okay, so that is a little taste. That was the video kind of cut up into some clips, but that gives you a sense of the type of work that we were doing together. All of the participants and their youth aged 18 to 26 work together to do this research project that you saw, where they investigate issues that really matter to them. And it's centered around what do they care about, what do they want to know, and how can they have these conversations on a level playing field with their local representatives and candidates, so that they understand that this type of conversation is accessible to them. They understand that they can get involved to change and to represent their local communities, and that they can create dialogue in a way where we can use art to actually have this opportunity to talk about policy change, to talk about different ways of archiving political dialogue. And so, Sean, if you want to jump in, you can kind of follow up.
I mean, the video says a lot, and Amy gave it the proper introduction. You know, and what I would suggest is that social engaged practice is the very thing that will allow artists to reinvent the platforms from which critical conversations take place. You know, so often when we have these conversations, it emerges from an underlying belief system that constituents, and namely Black and Brown community members, in our case, young people, don't care about voting. And instead, we want to reposition that framework and say, they don't believe that the candidates care about them, and that therefore the outcomes don't matter. And so the only way for us to re-engage a voting populace is therefore to make those policy issues more resonant and relevant to the lives of these young people. And the critical examination relies therefore on connecting the constituents and the candidates, or closing that proximity. And the only way to do so, therefore, is to call those candidates into a process through a framework of care and accountability. And what we often argue, and what Amy and I often talk about, is that the efficacy in this type of process and socially engaged work more generally is the stakes in relationship building. And for that strategy, which is slower, which is messier, but which carries more intention, for that approach and strategy to be more sincere, we have to think about the process as iterative, that the action doesn't end at the voting booth. And instead, for when these conversations take place, that the candidates have to continuously be called in so that they understand the words that they're sharing with their constituents, with these young people, will be called back upon and will have to be addressed again through this lens of accountability. And so the extension of this project is the continuous calling back in and developing of this relationship, which Amy will speak a little bit more about.
Yeah, so what's interesting is, you know, there was the big election, obviously, in June, the primary, one of the biggest local elections. And so there was a lot of interest from the students in terms of who was representing them, who was running for office in their district. And there was a lot of research done, which isn't usually done, to the point of what was said earlier about participation in local elections. And the project sustains. So we continue to do the research. There's going to be obviously another election at the state level coming up in, in this spring, summer season. And so how do we create sustainability with this accountability model so that there's a long-term engagement with these youth? And so it continues. It's a weekly session that we all get together. We research, we develop questions, we do interviews and field research. It's a non-hierarchical model where we're all learning from one another, a Freirean, bell hooks engaged pedagogy model where everyone brings in their own knowledge. And then from there, we also talk about healing through creative practice. And so we collaboratively decide on what art form we want to choose to communicate with and collaborate with our representatives on. So before you saw printmaking, seed paper making, this session we're doing collage making, and we actually are building a whole body of work that then gets exhibited and moves across this line of the institutional art world, the civically engaged, and at the community level, continuing through education and civic participation. And so you saw Princess at the end being encouraged by Kristen Richardson Jordan, who's now in office in Harlem, to run. And that's part of this project, to encourage these youth to understand that they can run themselves. And so, yeah, I think that the project continues. We are continuing with Recess Assembly. We are continuing to break down that wall, that barrier between also the institution of the academic model of Pratt and Recess Assembly, where it's youth who are court-aligned, formerly incarcerated, all teaching at the same level. And so the recess folks get to walk away from the program, putting on their resume that they were able to teach an MFA workshop at Pratt Institute, which is huge in terms of where that can create pathways for those youth to go.
Hey, so we're about halfway through now, and I want to open up for conversation. I do want to, hey, Sarah Saeed, I see you there. And I just wanted to say, hi, Sarah, you are, there you go. Hi, how you doing? So am I correct in saying that you are Yazmany's boss right now?
I am not his boss, not anymore. While he was, with us for Artists in Residence, yes, I had the privilege and honor of supporting Yazmany's vision to connect with New Yorkers.
Hold on a second.
Yeah.
Quickly introduce yourself, because I don't think people necessarily know.
Sorry, yes. My name is Sarah Saeed, and I'm the chair and executive director of the New York City Civic Engagement Commission, formerly used to work for Marco.
Yeah, we all work together.
We all work
but
together,
just to be clear, she's one of those people in city government who thought it was necessary and important to have an artist in residence, right? That this is one of those people that stepped up, and the different city agencies that said, raise their hand. So we want to have this. Okay, I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and we want to get to your questions in a minute, but I'm going to actually tear it down. The first question I think we've already answered, which is, what is socially engaged art and how does it help people connect? Okay, so get that question. But the question I wanted to ask y'all, and this is just for our panelists, is in a way, so these are interesting projects. These are communicative experiments. But so what's different about getting arts and arts organizations involved? Why should people do that? Why can't you just do an ad campaign? Why can't you just hire PR companies? What is it about the artists and arts? Because we all believe in it, but we all might have different reasons for it. Why should anybody invest in this as opposed to just like old-fashioned PR? Any artists or organizations?
I'll give you some. My gut reaction comes from the last presentation, Amy and Sean, incredible work. When I think about that work and when I think about everything that's been shared today, it's really about an exchange. And in some ways, it's a kind of spiritual practice, which is to actually show up and be in your bodies, right? Like, what are we doing with our hands? How are we moving through a process? And how do we make sure that we're giving people understanding of their own power through the making, through the participation, right? Like, it's not like I'm showing up and voting. It's I'm showing up and I'm creating, I'm doing, I am seeing myself, my voice is being reflected back at me. There is really, there's so much value in thinking about what do we all have to bring to the table and how do we engage together in transformation. So for me, all of these things, when I think of them as strategies, it brings me to a different place, but I do think relationship building is key, right? Humanizing the process of being a part of something that changes because you're in it, because we belong, right?
Thank you. Others?
Yeah, I work in an organization of one thing where everybody we have, including the teachers in our high schools, are all working artists. But as someone who started as like a political science major in college, I think of like the narrative of our current world perpetuated by like social media and the 24-hour news cycles, like this Hobbesian world of continual fear and danger of violent death and the life of man being solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, right? And artists and cultural organizations, we turn this on its head, right? We create a world of joy, right? And a world of inspiration. And in that, we allow people to move beyond the trappings of fear, where they're, where people, especially coming out of the pandemic, have been traumatized and don't believe they actually have power. And we liberate them. And I think that that is why we're different.
Tom, I would also say that you sort of alluded to this in your answer, in which typically political engagement strategies feel top down. And so the destabilization of an arts-based approach is to attempt to equalize the power dynamic and to meet people where they're at. And in that process, allowing the individuals, community members, et cetera, to understand that actually they are pushing the buttons. They are determining where the conversation goes.
And I would say, just to follow up on that, it's a point of literacy in civic engagement. And I think that it's this opportunity from a lot of the projects that we saw here to even involve youth. That's the next generation of people whose minds we need to kind of shape to be attuned to this being part of their common dialogue. Again, we keep saying meeting people where we're at. How do we bring in and call in all of what we've just seen, social change, you know, the possibility space of creating a future that we want to live in? How do we do that through calling in folks and having them, often the disenfranchised, the young, make work around these issues where it's generated from those folks, instead of again seeing billboards or again using PR firms, empowering those folks to actually create what we see. And in that is media literacy learning, in that is learning about political framing, in that is such an opportunity for education at a level where this could be sustainable throughout these people's lives. Those are the folks that need to get people to the polls, that understand the power that they have throughout their whole lives. And I think it's a real opportunity for fundamental social change to do it in that way, from the ground up versus the top down.
Can I throw something in, and then I'm going to ask you, Eric, to respond, which is, if I may, can you all see that? All right, yeah. So this is a image by a public artist in residence named Amanda Pingba, which started off with these street images, which say in different languages, often in English, you know, I believe in New York, or I'm not your scapegoat. It was you know, to fight anti-Asian violence, and it became, somebody saw a woman, an Asian American woman, saw these on the streets of New York City. She worked at Time magazine, and it ended up on the front page of Time magazine. You know, so we are not silent. And if you go to images, if you go to demonstrations, a lot of demos, you know, of anti-Asian violence demos, that these are held up as posters. They were made available to the public. That was a PR campaign. Pretty much, I'd say. I mean, it was a very successful PR campaign in which an artist in residence, came up with, I think, more imaginative and better images that caught people's imaginations. It's now, you know, it's all over the country. It's shows up in demos in LA and Texas and New York. So anyway, I'm just saying, and we're talking about sort of deep engagement, and I'm not being critical of Amanda, but that's not what her project's about. Her project is a PR campaign. A successful PR campaign by an artist, by an Asian American woman who felt it. And anyway, I just want to throw that over to Eric, because, you know, in a way, some of the stuff you do is PR campaigns.
For sure. Yeah. And
so let's go flip onto that side.
Yeah. It's funny to think about being a proponent of PR and I'm, you know, I completely agree with everything Sean and Amy and Yazmany and Marco were saying about, you know, bottom up kind of information. I also think it's important, without kind of like fetishizing the artist's role and making us into these magicians that have a magic wand, you know, that's tapped into the cosmos or something, you know, like, I think it's important to say that we are also opening up who gets to be creative, what creativity means in public. And when we engage, we also had some images on the cover of Time magazine, and to be able to see how the media machine works, and to be able to use that as a medium of art making and of creative action, and to think about these large systems like politics, like media, as spaces in which there is the possibility of creative action and creative thinking that could stir up and dig deep into the roots. If anything, I think that's what artists do, is we dwell longer than we should with these things that we have, these materials and systems, and therefore it leads to kind of the possibility of what Sean said of rethinking and new systems of action. Just a quick story on how we got on the cover of Time, which is, it indicates how messed up the media system is that we went to them with this project. We suggested that, maybe they could run with it. Maybe it could be on the cover. They rejected it before the 2016 election. They said, it's great, we'll do something, but not. And then we happened to get some of our, Alicia Keys posted about it on her social media. And then Time Magazine came back to us and was like, hey, you know what? Maybe we should put it on the cover of Time Magazine. And like, that story is kind of interesting because it exposes that these systems are things that we creative people and the creative networks that we are creating here have the collective power to actually like amplify the story without, working in a different way with PR or with advertising or with just publicizing the important work that is happening at the grassroots or in creative people's minds all over the country.
Cool. Hey, Dia, can I? Oh,
Yeah, I was. I think that there's something really honest about that reckoning too of the way that artists and art workers or these cultural organizations, we're in these spaces at once. We're able to be embedded in community as well as be at the table with folks that allow us entry into these systems of media, of government, of politics. This is like the place in which we're situated. The reality of the work we do is we're between these worlds all the time. And that is a tool, and that allows us to open paths that's grassroots, bottom up, but also when connected to these larger media campaigns or possibilities of circulating images and ideas in politics, like that's exactly where we fit in, and both at once are very effective. But I think it's really about, like, we talk really grandly about what art can do, but I think when we talk specifically, there's a specific purpose to each of these ways of working. I think like if the goal is to vote, if the goal is like sustained political participation, then that requires sustained commitment to community. If the goal is awareness of an issue, then that is something that can circulate broadly or in like a kind of mass media way. Like I think like it's really about being specific with what we're trying to do, because all are useful for different reasons.
All right, I'm going to make one comment about measuring impact, and then we're going to ask everybody if you have questions or comments, open it up to the crowd. Okay, there's a big question about impact. Like, how are we going to measure it? Funders are always asking this to us back when I was in the organizational side. And I just wanted to give an example of sort of how impact can be measured, should be measured. And so just from my experience at the Queen's Museum, we're struggling around the whole question of impact. And I think, Sean, you were just talking about sort of this iterative process. One of the things that I think is most important for these projects is for funders to be flexible about how things are measured. This is my opinion. This is not necessarily the opinion of Laura or the whole group here. That and that you have to allow people to learn during the process. And this, the way that we did at the Queen's Museum, particularly in the education department, was something called collaborative action research, which just said, let's ask some questions. And then during the process, we might find out that we're answering different questions and we're able to change the question. So if the project, and this is often about sort of engaging immigrant communities in multilingual educational programs. So one of the things that, we're saying, well, maybe these programs were designed to create a certain kind of like tech literacy. But what happened, this is by the real example, what happened was large degrees of social interconnectivity that people found extremely helpful in their lives. it was a different thing. The tech stuff was okay. We were sort of learning, these were tech courses, people are learning how to build a website in Mandarin, for their home community, or we did mostly Mandarin, Spanish, and Korean language courses. But anyway, I'm just saying, we learned during the process that we were doing things, fantastic stuff that we didn't know we were going to be doing at the beginning. So I'm saying to you all funders, as a person who's been in this side, if you allow that to happen, you're going to get a better result. And by the way, I'm not against measuring stuff. I'm against being inflexible in measuring. Okay, that's my hobby horse. I've said it a million times. And by the way, I have to say that as what I found, and you funders can tell me if you agree or not, was as long as we were taking it seriously, that we wanted to have some way of looking at this, the funders were open to different ways of measuring. So there's a difference between iterative and summative. Summative is, you wait till the end and you assess what you did. That's not helpful, I don't think. Blah, blah, blah. That's my little hobby horse. Okay, y'all, those folks, and everybody can unmute themselves, right? No, we're not muting anybody. And I'm going to hand it over now to Laura. If you wanted to ask some questions or ask, get your fellow funders talking, she can take over for the last section. And by the way, there's lots of other discussions we can have if nobody has questions. So Laura, take it away. And by the way, I have to say that just FYI, Laura was one of those, she was a funder at the Queen's Museum, and I learned a lot working with Laura. And I feel like, she was one of those open-minded people, so got to us on our own terms. So thank you for that, the old days.
Thanks. Mutual Admiration Society here with you, Tom, and all of you for presenting. It was really, really fun and provocative and inspiring. So thank you so much. So anybody on the call who has a question, you can raise your hand physically or through Zoom, or you can put it in the chat and I'll read it. So we'll just open it up. And I know there are a lot of inquisitive people on this call, so. And okay, so while we wait for somebody to.
So hey,
Looks
Laura,
like Patricia.
Pat has her hand.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go, your hand's up. Sorry, Pat. Yes,
No
you're on.
problem. I wanted to follow up on Tom's point about measurement, to say that I agree and I don't agree. And the reason I say that is because GoVoteNYC, we want to stay very focused on this question of voter participation, because it is so desperately poor, right, in New York City. And there's a very clear measurement for that, right? It's one of those things where the measurement is the metric is really clear. So my question to the panel is, I'm really interested in a very transactional frame of reference, which is not my normal way of thinking, but in a very transactional way. A lot of these things that you guys have described are fun. They're fun. Young people get to hang out with other young people. They get to do creative stuff. They're colorful. It's fun. The act of voting is the exact opposite. You're getting up early in the morning on a dreary day. You have a gazillion other things to do. You have to go to a dingy basement somewhere. The people aren't really they're not fun, right? Nobody's having fun when they go to vote. So my question is, if anybody has had any experience in connecting activities and events, such as the ones that you guys have described, to the actual physical act of voting. And I know that there's various legal restrictions. You can't set up a performance art, at the polling place, but there must be some other ways that you guys have thought about, actually saying, okay, we're going to do this really fun thing and this really creative thing, and then we're going to all go march off to actually vote.
Any panelists want to have a response to that? Are you, oh, I'm sorry. I guess something. Okay, hold on. Sorry, everybody. I've somehow muted. Okay, now you can unmute.
Hey, we're good. We can talk.
Yeah, what I will say is we, in this last cycle, I mean, I guess a couple of different things come up for me. In this last cycle, let me take it back. We believe that voting, and I believe that voting is just one piece of a larger spectrum of things in which you're engaged with the civic process, right? And in this last cycle, I guess to answer your question specifically, we engage folks on environmental justice issues, city council members in the 34th, 5th, and 7th district, having candidate forums where our youth members then questioned council members on issues that they came up with, or people running for council. And then that led to a process where the end result was that they went to, well, the intermediary step was they went to vote, right? So it starts off with like coming up with the questions, reaching out to the people running for office, researching those folks, putting the presentation together, moderating the event, asking the questions, then going to vote, then going and following up with surveys and the such, making sure that people are doing what they say they're going to do, then coming up with legislation, which is a process we're doing now, right? Which we will then deliver to their office. So I think that part of the problem in looking at this, right, is that voting is seen in you're right. It is like one, if you look at it kind of like in a vacuum, it is one jury step in a longer process. And I think that because we kind of like fetishize that one piece, and I understand why we fetishize it because it's easily quantifiable, right? But I think that for us, it is one larger tool, or one tool in a larger quiver of tools, right? And that includes petitions, rallies, direct action, right? I mean, we get arrested, we take the streets, right? And it's just like, we go into people's offices and all those other pieces. And voting, it just seems like one thing you can do. So I think part of the thing here is to open up the minds of folks to make them understand that like voting is not the thing, because if that's the culmination of what you're trying to do, then that sucks. Then it's totally anticlimactic. I went in, someone was nasty to me, I filled in a form, I put it to a machine, it spit it back, I put it in again, someone had to come and help me. Like, why am I wasting my time doing this? And then someone's going to, I feel, not follow through. But if I see my how my actions affect the larger process, and then I can enter in different spaces and have control and power in those spaces, then voting makes sense to me. And then I do it.
I also think voting doesn't have to be dreary, and it is not necessarily in other places. You know, one of the things, Amy and I were involved with this group called the Wide Awakes, that is hundreds of people trying to, we were involved in the whole Joy to the Polls thing, and on voting day, I was dancing with Moko Jumbies, Trinidadian Moko Jumbies, in the Bronx, like as people walk to the polls, because in Trinidad, there's also a tradition of like walking to the polls, and like this kind of party atmosphere. So I think it doesn't have to be, and there are a lot of creative ways that we can think about, and I'll actually drop in some video. You can see everybody dancing last year. So I think that's one of the tools, by the way. I don't want to pinhole artists to be the entertainers. I think that's one of the tools that we have, as well as what Marco was talking about, and other things.
And I just to piggyback on what Eric said, I mean, there are places in the country, municipalities, that are actually now passing laws that you cannot do performances, pass out food and other things, because they're intentionally trying to keep it jury. So, I mean, folks understand the connection there.
Yeah, I wanted, and to your point, Marco, and to your point, Eric, and to your question, Patricia, we did something this fall where we got a lot of young people together and we collaborated with NYPIRG to do something very similar to what the Wide Awakes were doing, where we had youth, we had a bunch of youth bands, actually, performers perform at the same time. We had booths to create voting plans and poll info there. So we did what you were talking about, Patricia, where we actually motivated groups of young people to go to their polling sites almost in a celebratory parade-like way. And so that, you know, that piece of education was folded in to the point that Marco made. It's not the only way to do it, but it is a way to get that. Also the civic education around, there were constitutional amendments. We're not just voting for the mayor. And so doing that civic education right before we get people to vote in a celebratory fashion, so you understand that, to Eric's point, it doesn't have to be dreary. It doesn't have to be procedural all the time. And, you know, we did also with the Wide Awakes, we were doing mutual aid at the sites, and there were food trucks where we were passing out food so people would stay longer and have conversations. But yeah, I think that's, to Marco's point, it's one piece of the puzzle. And that's why, you know, the engagement that we're doing is also about thinking about not only how do you vote, but how do you get into the system yourself? So you are representing your own community, and doing that kind of civic engagement ends up creating long, sustainable interactions with the system to kind of change it again from the ground up. And it can be celebratory, and we can use art to motivate. And I think that's a big part of that.
We have a question in the chat that I want to get to before we run out of time, and maybe Dia and Yazmany, you can respond to this. So this is from Rosario. How do you validate skepticism while also encouraging civic engagement? There's a fine line between talking over someone and redirecting the conversation. How do you validate a vulnerable population's fears while cultivating hope? It's a great question. So anybody?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to connect this question to what we were just talking about. When I think about a continuous engagement, I can't help but think about the work of community boards. When I think about voting and community boards in general, like I think often, you know, in the work of the CEC, how do we support community boards? How do we transform people's engagement to community boards? So often I think, just like with the People's Buzz, live music and food, get people to eat together before they make decisions. How do we make these experiences cultural inherently, so that when you're showing up to the community board meeting, gosh, it's going to be a hangout. It's going to be fun. We're going to talk about all of these things. We're going to address all of the challenges. I'll tell you that with the 33 youth that were a part of the People's Fellowship this summer, many of them showed up being like, abolish the police, the government's awful, all these things. To have space to actually name these things within government and be like, there's a distrust. We have failed. There have been challenges. How do we move through them, address them? You know, I always think about the Justice Initiative. I'm forgetting the name, but I think about the notion that we have to reckon with our history of trauma to be able to move forward and create a healthy system for all of us. And I think reckoning with the challenges that we've all dealt with. Brian Stevenson from the Equal Justice Initiative always talks about, we cannot build a future that's going to serve all of us if we're not reckoning with all of the things that we've dealt with. And so when I think about skepticism, or like folks that are showing up, it's like, let's make space for all of the criticism and all of the things that should be named, so that we can actually honestly, genuinely engage with the challenges and move forward. But I do think, just like with the People's Buzz, prioritizing that live music piece, the food piece, the fact that we're showing up as humans to get to know what our favorite food is, to get to know other aspects of ourselves in relationship to democracy and in relationship to the bigger picture, I think that's really critical.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, I think the community is the hope. That's like where the hope comes from, is centered and is sustained, is in those real and deep relationships with others that are feeling similar traumas, that are understanding what distrust looks like, what being what it looks like to interact with government and political systems from your positionality. I think that so many of the projects that have been talked about today do both. They hold the space of skepticism while using that skepticism to create pathways to hold elected officials or candidates accountable to community needs, while also bringing in performance, food, sustaining everyone's everyday needs as a way of really maintaining those community bonds. Like that's where hope lives. And that skepticism is not going to go away until government starts responding to the needs of the people. Like it's not going to go away until that trust is built and shown. Like it's kind of a forever dynamic between people and government. And it's it's in the community. And I would also just say that performance is not only an excellent way to bring joy, but it's kind of the Trojan horse. It's the way in which not only community is built, but it's a way in which people are able to see the macro to the micro, the systemic to the dance that they're doing next to each other. It's an important tool. It's been a tool for a lot of politicians and folks to get people to change behavior, to think differently, to interact with systems in new ways. So joy is like the great first read. And then there's a lot underneath that are unpacked through that joyous moment.
Tom, may I add just a quick something? In our process, there was a particularly resonant moment in which our court-involved youth interviewed the district attorney's candidates. And their questions all stemmed from their own lived experience with the justice system. And it was in that exchange that they gained clarity as to how some of those policy issues directly correlated with their day-to-day. All of those young people with that clarity voted. Every single one of them, because they understood the connection. Now, it is our responsibility to those same young people to, within that process, share that betrayal is very much part of that process. And that while we could create the platforms for that accountability and care to continue to return and pull those candidates back in, that political agitation was going to be as necessary and crucial as voting. And that therefore their stakes in the process wasn't just the ballot, but everything in terms of resistance and strategies of resistance that would be necessary from that point forward.
Yes, Tom.
Add one quick, okay. I was just thinking that when you talk about civic engagement and voting, I think it's extremely important. But I was just thinking about the fact that there's a lot of people on this call who have been in government before. Dia and I work together. Sarah's in government right now. Amy, Tracy, who am I missing? Marco, obviously.
Me too.
Laura Wood from Democracy NYC is also on the call.
Sean, you worked in government as well. So I actually think that it's really valuable to work in government, to encourage people to get into government, whether or not it's elected officials. And elected officials, of course, have a certain kind of legislative authority. They're not the people who do the stuff. The people who do the stuff are the people who work at the agencies. And I'm just saying that if you get people engaged, I am all for 100%. I wouldn't be on this call if I didn't believe in what y'all are trying to do. But part of the byproduct also could just be that idea of working in government and seeing what it's like and seeing what's possible and how it's possible to do stuff at scale. And by the way, Yazmany, in a way, you're working for government-ish as a consultant. So there's people here. Yeah, I just want to throw that.
Yeah, that's a great point, and thank you for making that. So we're getting close to the end. I just want to say thank you again to everybody. Such an interesting conversation. I'm so glad we recorded it. We'll share that, and also it will help us think about our funding strategy and how to do this in the best way possible, how to help New York City move forward using the arts. I'm going to turn it over to Martha King, one of the co-chairs of GoVoteNYC, just to close us out. And thanks, everybody. Have a happy Friday. Martha?
I just want to add something. Sorry.
Yes, yes.
I just wanted to say just a few words about why this is important to me, like, as a person in government, and a lot of people have spoken to this idea of building commitment, right, to engagement. And when I came into the CEC, I was very aware of government as a place that is not, it's a very hard place to be as a human being inside the world of politics. And I think that's part of the disengagement. I think we have to look at it holistically. I mean, Yazmany talked about it in terms of the body and engaging the body, but holistically as human beings, we have minds and hearts, and politics has been very, very focused on brain engagement, right? And that's how policies are created. It's very kind of like logic oriented and expert oriented, if you will. And as a result of that, we've kind of done away with the expertise that comes from lived experience of everyday people. And government creates policies and programs like in this vacuum. You know, we think that we're experts. There's no consultation with communities in that process. And therefore, people don't see programs and policies serving them. And so it makes a lot of sense that they're disengaged. And I wanted to do this artist in residency and just think more about arts as a social justice focused person for many, many years, is because I think that it kind of redoes that kind of, it creates a more dialectical space, heart and mind, spirit, like holistically seeing people as, and that's what I think creates the commitment. It's when we engage people as whole human beings. And I see art as a really important tool to create that holistic way of looking at politics. And why it matters at all is because democracy, you know, is not something that's handed to us on a silver platter. This has been kind of my soapbox talking point. It's something that's created by all of us, and it is an ongoing conversation. And it's the people who participate who make it what it is. So I just wanted to add that as my own kind of what I see as valuable in this work.
Thank you so much for adding that.
Thank you, Sarah. That's a great place to close. You know, we've been doing these periodic briefings to build our strategy at GoVoteNYC, but I was really, really excited about this one. And it did not disappoint. So affirming, so confirmational about sort of the direction we want to go in, and just to lift up some of the things that were so important and that were said today. So, you know, no line between art and politics, culture as a way to build power and to demystify, voting like creative practice as a two-way dialogue, moving beyond the trappings of fear. And of course, in a city where 14% of people 30 and under are participating in voting, young people. So the current members of GoVoteNYC, we all have totally different structures, different priorities, but we share this conviction about an engaged, an active, a larger electorate, and how important that is in our hometown here, and how all of our grant making, that's foundational to all of it. As we set the course for the next 2 years, we intend to center the arts, to center creativity, bringing much needed communicative creativity, voice, joy, community, new energy to voter mobilization. And so we're eager just to talk with all of you about how to move these ideas forward, to continue the conversation. Please reach out to Laura, to me, to any of us, and have wonderful weekends. Look forward to talking again about all of this. And thank you to Laura and Tom and all of you for being here. It's so great. Fabulous.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Happy weekends. Take care.